Father, in a room this size, there are multiple kinds of things going on in the hearts of each individual. It is nonsense to think one person could stand in the front of a room and say something that could possibly touch each heart. And yet, Father, one time your son took 5 loaves and 2 fish, it wasn't much, just crumbs, for the number of people that were gathered, and he broke them and blessed them and distributed them, and everybody left satisfied. Would your Holy Spirit please this morning take the crumbs that are offered? And would he take them as they're distributed and apply them to each heart so that each person here would hear something that he or she would say, that was meant for me today. And they would gain in that an affirmation, not of the cleverness of some speaker, but they would gain the affirmation that they matter to your Holy Spirit and you gave them what they needed. And we would sense the affirmation of your love for us. That's what we ask for this day. And we pray it for Christ's sake and for his glory. Amen. You have to take this by faith now, but when I was young, I was a football player. And I went to college to play football. I had no academic interest whatsoever except to stay eligible. I didn't know how to spell it, but it meant everything to me. And while I was in college, I became a Christian. And I wanted to tell my friends about Jesus. I'm still overwhelmed by the fact that God loved me and forgave me. And I'm grateful. So I shared Jesus with the guys I played football with. I saw about 15 guys a season come to faith. So we had about 60 of us that were Christians. And the guys would ask me questions. You know, if God's good and all powerful, why does evil exist in the universe? Before I became a Christian, I never once asked that question. I heard about it when I was witnessing. It's a question that matters to me. I've written a book on it. It's an important question, but I didn't know. So I thought, if that's what's keeping you from faith, I won't leave a stone unturned. And I went and started digging for answers. And this name kept percolating to the top of the literature. It was a name, C.S. Lewis. I never bothered to read one of his books, but my sister was teaching 5th grade, and I visited her one night for dinner, and she told me the plot of The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe that she was reading to her kids. And remember, I'm a brand new Christian. So I went out and read the Narnian books, and I thought, these are pretty good. I said, I want to find out more about this guy. He's got 73 books and 11 to 17 different literary genres, depending on how you count them. So I read his autobiography where he talks about how he went from atheism to faith, called Surprised by Joy. And he talked about being haunted by these deep longings and the quest to try to find the object of his longings. I knew the longings. And Lewis gave me a vocabulary for my own soul. And I just started reading him voraciously. And when I got ready to graduate from college, a man wisely said to me, you did not get an education in college. I thought, wow, why was I paying all this tuition? He said, you did not get an education in college, you laid a foundation for an education. What do they call the graduation in universities? Commencement. He says, you will now commence your education by building on that foundation. And he said, pick an author who will take you places and make him your life study. I think he could have said, pick a composer, pick an artist, pick a period of history, pick a country. I picked Lewis. I think I could have done worse. I go to seminary. I'd been a PE major. Longest paper I think I wrote in college was 5 pages in crayon. And now I have to write a thesis. And I'm going, oh my heavens. And I said, I didn't want to write it on the use of the optative mood in the Greek text of Philemon. That wasn't going to hold me. I said, could I write it on Lewis? They said yes. That's when I first put pen to paper on Lewis. And as time passed, I started writing more and speaking more on him and so on. And I've now lectured on Lewis in 22 countries and 88 different universities. But I still see myself as that PE major in college. And I'm grateful for the opportunities that have come. And I suggest that to you. One day you're going to commence after you graduate from college. Pick an author who will take you places, or an artist, or a composer, and make him your life study. As I have studied Lewis all these years, I've found a few big ideas. We only have time for one this morning. But one of them is this concept of longing. When Lewis first became a Christian, the first book he wrote was a year after his conversion. It's called Pilgrim's Regress, an allegorical apology for Christianity, reason, and romanticism. His main character, John, sees an island, a vision of an island off in the distance, and he sets off in the quest to find the island, and he longs to go there. And while he's there, he has all these adventures, and he comes upon a hermit. It's the only allegory Lewis wrote. The Narnian books are not allegories. But he comes to this hermit who represents history in the allegory, and he says, I want to know about the longings. And history tells him there's basically three kinds of longings. I think that's way understated. There's more than that, but three he talks about. The one is the longing for myth, and he situates it in classical times, Greek and Roman literature. And then he says there's also the longing for the lady, or the longing for relationship, and he situates that in medieval times. And then he talks about the longing for nature, or the longing to have that which is spoiled in us fixed, and he situates that in the Romantic era. So as I talk about these, let me see if I could dissect these three kinds of longings. The first one is myth. And I think that as we think about myth, we can think from that time Homer, the Iliad. You guys have probably all read that here at the school. And you've read the Odyssey. What's the deal with the Odyssey? Dorothy Sayers tried to summarize the Odyssey by this, that Ulysses just wanted to go home. He wanted to go home to Penelope, his wife, get back to Ithaca. And there's so many roadblocks that the gods put in his way. And when he gets back there, what is it? It's not the same. The suitors have come and they're kind of messing things up. You see the ending of that story, by the way? It's a little bit like Tolkien's The Hobbit, where Bilbo Baggins just wants to go home. When he gets back, the Sackville Bagginses have declared him dead. They're dividing up his stuff. But here's the Odyssey. It's a story about wanting to go home. I know that my son, Jeremy, my oldest son, when he was a boy at Wheaton College, if they were going to have a play and they needed a child in the play, they'd always call up and say, could you tell Jeremy to come and audition for this play? So he auditions, and he was to play Pip in the adaptation of Charles Dickens' Great Expectations. He had the majority of the lines for the first third of the play. And he was 2.5 months living the life of a college student when he was 10 years old. Can you imagine? If we couldn't find him at home, we'd go up to the dorm and find him in one of his thespian buddies' rooms with their earphones on, rocking out to their music and stuff. They did 14 performances. After the last performance, I went to pick him up, and he's coming through the theater and discovers for the first time the Wheaton College drama department. These kids don't leave after the last performance till they've dismantled the set. And he is just horrified that this world he's come to love is being destroyed. And he says, Dad, I got to sit down. He looked like Obi-Wan Kenobi when that planet blew up, and he knew there was a disturbance in the force. So he sits down, and after a while I said, Jeremy, we have to go. He shuffled out to the car like an old man. And he stops when we get to the car and said, Dad, I just didn't want it to end. I said, but Jeremy, it's the nature of every play that it comes to an end. It's the nature of every vacation and every holiday that it comes to an end. It's the nature of every year of school. It will come to an end. As a matter of fact, it's the nature of your childhood that one day it will come to an end. Maybe what you're longing for is the one thing that never has to end. And he stopped and he looked at me and he said, do you mean heaven, Dad? Do you mean heaven? And I said, yeah. There's a heaven longing, a place longing. And one other quick story about it. I'm old. I'm a fossil. That when I retired from Wheaton College, the archaeology department called me up and said they had shelf space for me. So I remember going back to my 50th high school reunion. You people here at Pacifica, one day you're going to go back to your 50th reunion. And I'll tell you what it'll be like. All those places that were familiar in the little town where I grew up at in South Central Los Angeles. The old buildings have been torn down, new buildings have been put into place. The vacant lots where we played games, they have buildings built on them now. I went to my elementary school just to see it. Remember in elementary school, if you played basketball, what the score was at the end of recess? It was like 6-4. Took you forever. You needed JATO rockets to get the ball up in the basket. I went back, the basket's only this high at that school. And I wondered, how did we ever find satisfaction in that playground? It was so small. When I was young, I thought you needed Magellan to figure out how to navigate the great spaces. I go back and I see my high school friends at the dinner. They gave us a name tag with your yearbook picture on it because nobody would recognize you anymore. All my old friends, they're bald and fat and gray. I'm fine, but life's been hard on them. And you go back and it's not the same. We have embedded in us this longing. Abraham went out from Ur of the Chaldees, for he was looking for the city that has foundations, whose architect and builder is God. There's the pilgrim longing. Then we have the lover lady longing. I heard how many of you have read Dante? Did you start with the Vita Nuova? Isn't it great? I remember when I first heard about Dante, I was in 7th grade, Mr. Trejo's class. I can still see the yellow textbook. I can still see Dante standing on the Ponte Vecchio over the Arno where he first meets Beatrice. But Mr. Trejo said Dante met this girl when he was just a kid. He lit a candle in his heart for her. He ends up marrying somebody else, but he still got the burning candle for Beatrice. And I'm thinking to myself, this guy's a chump. I didn't want anything to do with Dante. And then I become interested in Lewis. Lewis thought he was the greatest greatest narrative poet. Dorothy Sayers liked him. Charles Williams, another one of the Inklings, liked him. Matter of fact, Charles Williams talked to Dorothy Sayers and said, "Hey, Dorothy, have you ever read Dante?" And she said, "Yeah, back when I was in college." There are so many people who think that their education inoculates them against reading. Lewis says if it's a good book, it's worth reading more than twice. It's worth reading throughout your life. And Dorothy Sayers, Williams was talking about it so much, she went and reread Dante. Then she said, this is really good stuff. She went and learned Italian. She did the first English translation that maintained the Italian rhyme scheme. And I'm thinking, Lewis, Williams, Dorothy Sayers, a 7th grade teacher. Maybe I should reevaluate this. And I started with the Vita Nuova, where all of a sudden new life, Dante's heart was open to something about love and relationship. But 25 years after the Vita Nuova, he writes a Divine Comedy, and Virgil comes and collects him. Virgil's another interesting author about longing, by the way. So he comes and collects Dante and leads him through the Inferno and leads him halfway through the Purgatorio. And Beatrice comes out of heaven to collect him, to take him on into the Paradiso, to the very threshold of the vision of God. Every one of you, if you haven't had it happen already, is going to have a moment where there's first love in your life. You find yourself falling for somebody. And I want to say that's a great experience. But if you think that that first love is the ultimate first love, you're not going to treat that person you love very well. C.S. Lewis said in an essay called First and Second Things, put first things first, you get second things thrown in. Put second things first and you lose out on first and second things. Make Jesus your first love, ultimate first love. And so Dante's basically saying that in these books. How many of you have read Chaucer's Troilus and Cressida? It's another great one. Here's Troilus. He's in Troy during the time of the Trojan Wars. And all these guys in Troy are falling in love. The war is 8-5 kind of thing. They come in at the end of the day. People line up to see which horses don't have riders, who is not marching in the ranks anymore? Who might have died on the battlefield? In the evening, all the soldiers are having parties, they're kind of falling in love, so on. Troilus is terrible. He's like a junior high kid who, when he sees his friends starting to fall in love, just teases them incessantly. He's horrible, absolutely horrible. But all of a sudden, one day, he's riding in from the battle, and he looks and he sees this woman, and he notices her as he rides by. He can't ask anybody who it is because of the way he's ragged on all his friends. The next day he's riding out to battle and he's scanning, looking for her, and he sees her and he watches. And so it is every day before battle and after battle. He's looking and he finds out her name is Cressida. He finds out that her father is the high priest of Troy. Calchas is his name. And then he finds out Pander is her maternal uncle. He knows Pander. He says, Pander, you got to set up a dinner for me to meet Cressida. And he wants to do it all secretive. So he sets up the dinner. And Troilus is just a complete doofus. He's so nervous about meeting her that he stumbles over everything. She is singularly unimpressed. He realizes it didn't go well, and he says to Pander afterwards, you got to set up another one. He says, I don't think I'm going to be able to coerce her to come back and have dinner with you again. But Troilus continues to tease him about it, and he brings her back. And they have dinner, and it goes a little better. And the next time it goes better still. And the next time it goes better still, and pretty soon their hearts start to knit together. It's at that time that Calchas, the high priest, Cressida's father, he ends up becoming the Benedict Arnold of Troy and sells secrets to the Greeks, and he has to flee, and everybody's looking at her to see if the acorn didn't fall far from the tree. And she proves to be a woman of character. And Troilus' heart goes out to her all the more. Well, as time passes and they are now madly in love, there's a POW swap between the Greeks and the Trojans. And Calchas has enough influence on the Greeks that he says, I want my daughter. So they put her in the brokerage, and it means then that this relationship that's been budding is now going to be ripped apart, and the two of them are so grieving, and they make an arrangement that a month, maybe two after she's been gone, he'll sneak out of the city at night and meet her on a hillside. And he just grieves. After she's gone, he gets on his horse late at night and he rides around to the places where they had met. He opens up her letters and he reads them again. He kisses them. He wants proximity to her. And finally the night comes when he's supposed to meet her. And he rides out to the hill, and she doesn't show up. He said, what if I got the wrong day? And he's just horrified. So he goes the next day, and he goes the next day. Every night for a month he goes. She never shows up. What's happened among the Greeks is she's so brokenhearted that among the Greeks, she's weeping, and there's this one Greek warrior named Diomed. And he sees her, and he's smitten by her beauty. But she won't talk to her father. She won't talk to anybody, so he just watches. And after about a week, when she's been alone, he goes up and he says, tell me your sorrows. And he listens to her. And the next day after the battle, he says, tell me your sorrows. And he listens to her. And the next day, tell me your sorrows. And he listens to her. And pretty soon, her heart starts to go out towards Diomed. And when the day comes when she is supposed to show up to see Troilus, she doesn't go. Troilus finally hears about it, and he's incautious on the battlefield. He doesn't even care to live anymore. One day they meet on the battlefield, and they say the sparks from that battle of swords clashing against armor were furious. And one day finally, not caring anymore, he's incautious in battle, and he's slain. And in the story, his ghost rises above his dead body and gains perspective of the whole battlefield. And Chaucer ends that story with these words: "Blessed Jesus, turn all our loves to thee." If you put love of God first, Chaucer's saying, you'll enjoy these other loves as they come. If you put these other loves first, that's going to crash on you at some time. And the love of God will diminish because you won't have made it your priority. And Lewis writes about this in his great literary work, The Allegory of Love. So there's the lover longing. Then we get to the romantic nature longing. And he borrows from Prelude by Wordsworth. And Wordsworth, as he aged, started to see he was getting more jaded, bitter. You know, they say wisdom comes with age. It might. Sometimes callousness comes with age, bitterness. It depends on what you're cultivating throughout your life, what you're going to have for the fruit of your age. So Lewis recognizes this, that there's a longing in each of us, if we're honest with ourselves, that we want the broken stuff fixed. I talk to people about Jesus and I say, you know how I happened to come to faith? They go, no, how? I said, I became aware of brokenness in my life. And I couldn't fix it. And I became aware that I wanted to be loved. And so consequently, I found out that God loved me and forgave me, and I found the message compelling when I looked at where I was at and what I needed. So I've lectured at probably 8 of the different Oxford University colleges. This one night I was speaking at Evensong at Hartford College, Oxford. The halls at Oxford are spectacular. How many of you have seen any of the Harry Potter movies? You know that hall where the owls are flying in and so on? That's a real place. That's at Christ Church at Oxford. Hartford is about as big as this basketball field, this basketball court. And they have long tables that run the length of the hall. And the students sit at the long tables. The professors sit 3 steps up at the high table. If the students are eating roast beef, the students are eating prime rib. If the students are eating steak, the professors are eating filet mignon. You have huge paintings of benefactors and famous grads. John Donne the poet went there. William Tyndale the Bible translator. They're looking down on you while you're eating, and I think they want to make sure you're using the right knife, fork, and spoon. Everybody comes dressed in their academic gowns. The meal begins with a Latin prayer. The wine pours freely, and you could cut the pretense with a knife. If you don't take yourself too seriously, it can be fun, but some people take themselves way over the top. Chaplain introduced me as having just preached in the Evensong service. They have their Latin prayer. We sit down. The woman sitting across from me teaches history there. She says, "So Jerry," real loud, "why are you a Christian?" Somebody told me they thought she was saying it like that because she wanted to make me the entertainment for that night's dinner. I have a doctorate in philosophy of religion. I think I probably could have gone toe-to-toe with her. But I think we would have all had indigestion if that would have been the case. And I didn't become a Christian because some slick argument convinced me. I've taught apologetics in college. I know about those subjects. But I didn't become a Christian that way. I became a Christian because I was aware of brokenness. And so I said to her, I became a Christian because I was aware in my heart I had high ideals, the high ideal of love, and yet I had sharp words of people I say I love most in the world. I believed in justice, but there have been times I was unfair in my treatment of others. And I don't think I could make it in life if I didn't know that there could be a thing called forgiveness, and I could be loved unconditionally, and that's why I became a Christian. She was taken back by that answer. She said, well, I could appreciate that, but that's just not my issue. I said, really? I think I understand what you mean. I didn't become a Christian until I was in my first year of college, and I didn't become perfect overnight. That took 2 or 3 weeks before that happened. The whole faculty busted up in rip-roaring laughter, and when she stopped laughing, I said, your laughter betrayed you. She said, what do you mean? I said, well, you and I just met, so you didn't know the specifics of my life that made that last statement nonsense, but you laughed at the nonsensical nature of it. which tells you know that nobody has it together. She said, you got me. I said, I wasn't out to get anybody. But let me ask you a question. Knowing of your own struggles, what gets you by? So I have faith in humanity, she said. I said, well, let me ask you about that faith in humanity, because I'm interested in anything that's going to help me. I said, have you ever had bad treatment by another human being? She said, of course. I said, have you ever treated another human being poorly? She said, well, I suppose so. She's a little softer on herself. I said, how does this faith in humanity work where we live in a world where we've wounded others and we've been wounded by others? And just then the man sitting next to her top French chair said, how does it work for Christians? And we spent the rest of that meal talking about themes of grace and the love of God. And it was wonderful. So here's 3 kinds of longing. There could be others. Remember, you guys weren't even born when 9/11 hit, but there was that one plane, Flight 93, that crashed in the field in Pennsylvania. I don't know if you've read about it. And there was this one guy on board the plane, Todd Beamer, who said, let's roll. Todd Beamer used to come to my house for Bible study. I knew him. I knew his wife. He got up that morning to get on a plane and go do business. And his head never laid down again on that same pillow. I remember thinking that day, how can we be safe? The longing to want to be safe is a heaven longing. There's been no guarantees in this world that everything's going to be safe. And I said to myself too, what's this day going to come to mean? Have you ever been in a situation you say, what is this going to mean? If the world is nonsense and has no meaning and no value, then that's a fair question, but you ask the question because you're questing for meaning. That is a heaven longing, ultimately. So in light of that, let's turn to Lewis and see what the object of this longing is. One of my favorites of the Narnian books, you know, is Voyage of the Dawn Treader. There once was a boy named Eustace Clarence Scrubb, and he almost deserved it. And they're on this voyage to take Reepicheep to Aslan's country and to find out what happened to the 7 lost lords of Narnia. And they have many adventures, and they have this one where they come to the island of voices. It's the island of the Dufflebuds. The Dufflepuds are really monopods, but they can't even get their own identity right. And they've been turned invisible because of their obnoxiousness. And the magician of that island has done this, and so the Dufflepuds who are invisible say they want somebody from the Dawn Treader to go to the magician's house and find the spell that would make them visible again. And it has to be a girl. There's only one girl on the ship. It's Lucy. She volunteers to go. They tell her where they think it is. She has to go in this big hall. She has to go up this winding staircase, go to the library, and she finds that the book is there. It's a huge book. But to stand up on these steps to read it, she has to have her back to the door. It's a little nerve-wracking. She tries to open the book and she can't, but then she sees it's got a clasp. She opens the clasp. She opens the book. And it had a nice smell. And the writing had thick downstrokes and thin upstrokes. And she goes, where's the spell for making things visible? I might be here for a long time. And so she starts reading the book. And there's a spell for how to take a swarm of bees. How to make it rain after it hasn't rained for a long time. How to make it stop raining. How to give a person a donkey's head like they did to poor Bottom in Midsummer Night's Dream. And finally she comes to the spell. How to make one more beautiful than the lot of mortals. Well, between her and her sister Susan, everybody pays attention to Susan. Nobody was paying much attention to her. And she sees that this book has illumination in the margins of the manuscript, and she could see what's going on. And she sees a girl standing on a stair looking in a book, and she sees these other girls over here. One of them looks like her sister Susan. She sees a girl before the book, and she's uttering something, and all of a sudden she sees everybody turn their attention away from Susan and turn all their attention to Lucy. And she sees all of a sudden, like Helen of Troy, people start launching armies and ships to fight for her favor. And she says, I'm going to say that spell, turning all the attention on herself. And the face of Aslan comes out of that book and gives a growl, and she quickly turns the page. The next page is how to listen in on what your friends are saying about you when you're not there. Have you ever had a good victory on some area of temptation and you didn't really have it because you were so clever? You had it because maybe somebody walked in the room before you did something you shouldn't have done? So you feel like you deserve the next one. So she doesn't even think about it. She just says it so she can listen in on what her friends are thinking about her when she's not there. And all of a sudden she hears clickety-clack, 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 clickety-clack. It's a train car. And her biggest enemy at school, Adela Pennyfeather, is trying to goad her best friend to saying something nasty about her. And her friend resists and resists, and finally she says something nasty about her, and Lucy just breaks her heart. She starts yelling at the book. And brokenhearted, she turns a page. And the next page is for the refreshment of the Spirit. A spell for the refreshment of the Spirit. And as she reads it, it goes on for 3 pages. And she wants to go back and read it again because it was the best story she'd ever heard in her life. And she finds out in this book you can only go forward, you can't go back. And she's trying to remember what it was about. Oh yeah, it was about a cup and a sword and a green hill and a tree. And from that day on, whenever Lucy read a book that she considered was a good book with a good story, it was one that reminded her of the story in the magician's book. And then she turns a page. There's a spell to make invisible things visible, and she utters it, and right there, Aslan appears next to her. Aslan, how did you get here? Oh, I've been here all along, dear heart. Did you not think I would abide by my own rules? You've been listening where you shouldn't have listened. Oh, Aslan, will it ever be better? Will I ever have that friendship restored? What would have happened if I wouldn't have said that spell? He says, nobody gets to find out what would have happened, but everybody can find out what will happen. But come, we need to meet the magician of this house. And Lucy says, Aslan, tell me about the story, about the cup and the sword and the tree and the green hill. And he says, oh, dear heart, that's a story I will be telling you forever and ever and ever. It's the gospel story. The tree, the cross, the green hill, Calvary, the cup that he was willing to drink, and the sword, the death that he was willing to die in our place. All the longing in our heart, ultimately, properly read and understood, is pointing us to that great story. And I think we could probably end it there.